Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Meridian, watching the strange energy readings pulse across her screens. The deep space around them looked empty, but her instruments told a different story. Something massive was hidden out there in the darkness between stars. "Captain, we should report this and return to base," said Lieutenant Torres, her voice tight with worry. "The energy signature doesn't match anything in our databases." Sarah studied the data flowing across her console. In her 10 years of deep space exploration, she had never seen readings like these. The energy patterns shifted and moved like they were alive. Her training told her to follow protocol, call for backup, and wait for orders, but her instincts as an explorer pushed her forward. "Negative, Lieutenant. We're the first human ship to reach this sector. If we don't investigate, it could be months before another expedition gets here." Sarah's fingers moved across the control panel. "Take us closer." Half impulse. The Meridian moved through space toward the source of the strange readings. Around the galaxy, other species watched through their long-range sensors. The proud Catharan Empire monitored the human ship with mild interest. The calculating Zephyrite Collective recorded every detail for their databases. The warrior clans of Drakmor barely noticed another alien species heading toward trouble. To most galactic civilizations, humans were newcomers. They had only been traveling between stars for a few decades. Most species considered them brave but foolish. They rushed into unknown situations without proper caution. Today would prove that reputation both right and wrong. As the Meridian approached the energy source, space itself began to bend around them. Sarah felt her stomach drop as gravity waves hit the ship. Warning alarms filled the bridge with red light and screaming sounds. "Captain, gravitational anomaly dead ahead," Torres shouted over the noise. "It's not natural." Sarah's eyes went wide as she saw what waited for them. A black hole sat in space where no black hole should exist. But this wasn't a natural formation. Metal structures surrounded it, feeding energy into its swirling mass. Ancient technology that looked both beautiful and terrifying. "Emergency reverse," Sarah ordered, but it was too late. The artificial black hole's gravity grabbed their ship like a giant hand. The Meridian groaned and shook as invisible forces pulled it apart. Throughout the galaxy, the monitoring stations of various species recorded the event with cold interest. The Catharan observers noted that another young species had encountered void-borne technology. The Zephyrite Collective updated their probability calculations for human survival. The Drakmor warriors barely looked up from their own battles. None of them moved to help. On the bridge of the Meridian, Sarah fought to save her crew as the ship broke apart around them. "All hands to escape pods. Emergency evacuation." She moved through the chaos, making sure every crew member reached safety. The escape pods launched one by one, their small engines carrying them away from the dying ship. Sarah watched 23 pods escape successfully. Only her command pod remained. "Captain, your pod is ready." Torres called through the communication system. "Launch all remaining pods." "That's an order," Sarah replied as she ran toward her escape pod. Behind her, the bridge collapsed as the ship's hull finally gave way. She reached her pod and jumped inside, sealing the hatch just as the Meridian broke in half. Her fingers flew over the launch controls, but warning lights flashed across the panel. The pod's navigation system was damaged. The engines were failing. Sarah launched anyway. As her pod spun away from the wreckage, she watched the void-borne technology pull the remains of her ship into the black hole. The ancient machines had been waiting here for thousands of years, a trap for any species curious enough to investigate. Her pod's damaged systems couldn't match the trajectory of her crew's escape pods. While they headed toward the nearest inhabited system, her pod fell toward a different destination. The gravitational forces pushed her toward a red star system at the edge of known space. Warning: navigation failure. Life support at 60%. Approaching planet Kelthera Prime, the pod's computer announced in its calm, electronic voice. Sarah tried to remember what she knew about Kelthera Prime. It was listed in the galactic databases as a quarantine world. No ships were supposed to land there. No rescue missions were authorized. The planet was marked with every warning symbol the galactic community used. She tried to send a distress signal, but the pod's communication system was too damaged. No one would know where she had landed. No one would come looking for her on a quarantine world. As her pod entered the planet's atmosphere, she felt the heat of re-entry through the hull. The automated landing systems tried to find a safe place to set down, but with damaged sensors, The computer made poor choices. The pod crashed through the canopy of a massive forest, breaking through layer after layer of twisted branches. Sarah felt every impact as she was thrown against her restraints. Finally, the pod hit the ground with a sound like thunder. Silence followed. Sarah opened her eyes and tasted blood in her mouth. Her head hurt and her left arm felt wrong, but she was alive. The pod's life support system still worked, filling her small space with breathable air. She looked through the small window and saw a world that looked like a nightmare. The trees around her crash site were enormous, their trunks wider than buildings. Strange sounds echoed through the forest, roars and howls and clicking noises that made her skin crawl. The pod's computer spoke again. Atmospheric analysis complete. Air is breathable for humans. Warning, multiple large life forms detected. Recommend extreme caution. Sarah checked her equipment. She had a small energy weapon, basic survival gear, a damaged translation device, and emergency rations for 7 days. After that, she would need to find food and water on a planet that the galaxy's most dangerous species avoided. She looked at the red sun setting through the alien trees and made a decision. She would survive. She would find a way to contact her crew. She would get off this world. Sarah Chen didn't know that she had just landed on the home world of the Ravenclaw Syndicate. She didn't know that the pack hunters who ruled this planet had already caught her scent. She didn't know that the galaxy's most feared apex predators were moving through the forest toward her crash site. All across the galaxy, the monitoring stations updated their records. Commander Sarah Chen was listed as missing and presumed dead. Her crew would be rescued from their escape pods within days. But no one expected to see her again. The galaxy had watched her fall. Now it would watch to see how long she could survive among monsters. In the deep forest of Kelthera Prime, something large moved between the trees. Yellow eyes reflected the last light of the setting sun. Sharp claws scraped against bark as powerful legs carried a hunter toward the smell of something new and interesting. The apex predators had found fresh prey. Sarah woke to the sound of metal being torn apart. Something was ripping into her escape pod from the outside. She grabbed her energy weapon and pressed herself against the back wall of the small compartment. The pod's outer hull screamed as claws scraped across it. Through the small window, Sarah saw a shadow move past. Something huge. Something that walked on 2 legs but moved like a hunting cat. The ripping sound stopped. Sarah held her breath and waited. Minutes passed in silence. Maybe whatever was out there had lost interest and moved on. Then a yellow eye appeared at the window. It was twice the size of a human eye, with a black pupil that seemed to look right into her soul. The eye studied her for a long moment, then disappeared. Sarah's hands shook as she checked her weapon's power level. The energy cell was at full charge, enough for maybe 20 shots. She hoped that would be enough. A new sound reached her ears, clicking noises like someone tapping claws against stone, but the clicks had a pattern to them. They sounded almost like language. More eyes appeared at different windows around the pod. Sarah realized she was surrounded. The creatures were talking to each other, deciding what to do with the strange thing that had fallen from the sky. The pod shook as something landed on top of it. Dust fell from the ceiling as heavy footsteps moved across the hall. Then silence again. Sarah knew she couldn't stay in the pod forever. Her air would run out eventually. Her food and water wouldn't last long, and these creatures seemed patient enough to wait. She made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone watching from the galactic monitoring stations. She opened the pod's hatch. The first thing that hit her was the smell. The air was thick with the scent of growing things, decay, and something else. Something that smelled like a zoo full of predators. The second thing she noticed was the size of everything. The trees around her crash site were massive, their trunks disappearing into darkness above. The plants on the forest floor were larger than anything on Earth. This was a world built for giants. The third thing she saw was the creature watching her from 10 feet away. It stood, 9 feet tall on powerful legs that ended in clawed feet. Its body was covered in dark scales that seemed to shift color in the dim light. 2 arms ended in hands that had 4 fingers, each tipped with a claw as long as a knife. Its head was angular and reptilian, with those huge yellow eyes that missed nothing. Sarah raised her weapon and the creature tilted its head to one side. It made a clicking sound that might have been amusement. "Stay back," Sarah said, even though she knew it couldn't understand her words. Her translation device was broken, producing only static when she tried to use it. The creature took a step forward. Sarah fired a warning shot over its head. The energy beam hit a tree and burned a hole through the bark. The creature stopped and made more clicking sounds. This time, other voices answered from the forest around them. Sarah realized she was surrounded by an entire pack of these things. But instead of attacking, they seemed to be having a conversation. The creature in front of her pointed at Sarah's weapon, then at the burned tree. It clicked several times and the others clicked back. Sarah slowly lowered her weapon. The creature watched her carefully, then did something that surprised her. It sat down. At 9 feet tall, even sitting down, the creature was still taller than Sarah. But the gesture seemed less threatening, almost peaceful. Sarah looked around at the other creatures hiding in the forest. She could see at least 6 pairs of yellow eyes watching her, but none of them moved to attack. "I'm Sarah," she said, pointing to herself. "Sarah." The creature tilted its head again and made a soft clicking sound. It pointed to itself and made a different pattern of clicks. Sarah tried to copy the sound, but her human throat couldn't make the same noise. The creature seemed to find this amusing. It made what might have been laughter. Over the next hour, Sarah learned several important things about her situation. The creatures were intelligent. They were curious about her, and they didn't seem interested in eating her. Immediately, she also learned that this planet was full of things that did want to eat her. A sound like a freight train crashing through the forest made all the creatures jump to their feet. Something huge was coming toward them, breaking trees as it moved. The creature nearest to Sarah grabbed her arm with surprising gentleness and pulled her toward the damaged pod. It clicked urgently at the others, who formed a defensive circle around Sarah. Through the trees came something that looked like a cross between a bear and a tank. It was the size of an earth elephant, covered in thick armor plates with a mouth full of teeth like swords. Its small eyes focused on Sarah with predatory hunger. The creatures around her spread out and began making different clicking sounds. These weren't conversation clicks. These were hunting calls. Sarah watched in amazement as the pack coordinated their attack. 3 creatures circled to the left while 2 went right. The one nearest to Sarah stayed close to protect her. The bear tank thing charged forward, but the pack was ready. They moved with perfect timing, striking at weak points between the armor plates. Their claws found gaps that Sarah couldn't even see. The battle lasted only minutes. The huge predator fell with a crash that shook the ground. The pack gathered around it, clicking in what sounded like satisfaction. The creature that had protected Sarah turned to her and made a gentle clicking sound. It pointed at the dead monster, then at Sarah, then made a sweeping gesture toward the forest. Sarah understood. The forest was full of things like that. Things that would kill her without thinking twice. But these creatures had protected her from one of them. As the pack began to move deeper into the forest, the one nearest to Sarah waited. It clicked softly and gestured for her to follow. Sarah looked back at her ruined escape pod. It would provide shelter, but not safety. Not on a world like this. She shouldered her pack and followed the creatures into the forest. Behind them, other predators emerged from hiding to fight over the remains of the bear tank thing. The sound of snarling and ripping echoed through the trees. Sarah realized that her new companions had just saved her life. On a world where everything wanted to kill everything else, she had somehow found protectors. Far above, the galactic monitoring stations tracked her life signs moving through the forest. The observers updated their predictions for her survival. Most still gave her less than a week, but a few noted something interesting in their reports. The human was traveling with a pack of Ravenclaw Syndicate hunters. This had never happened before. In the deep forest of Kelthera Prime, Sarah Chen walked beside creatures that the galaxy feared. She didn't know their name yet. She didn't know their history or their culture, but she was beginning to understand that they might be the key to her survival. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's crash landing. She had learned to recognize the different clicking patterns the creatures used to communicate. The one who had first protected her, whom she had started calling Scar because of the long mark across his snout, seemed to be the pack leader. Sarah had also learned that the creatures were called Ravenclaws by the few galactic databases that mentioned them. But living with them, she discovered they called themselves something that sounded like Kethai in their clicking language. The pack had accepted her presence with surprising ease. They shared their food with her, taught her which plants were safe to eat, and protected her from the countless predators that hunted in the forest. In return, Sarah had started helping them in small ways. She showed them how to use simple tools to get food from hard-to-reach places. She helped them understand the patterns of some prey animals by drawing maps in the dirt. Small things, but the Ravenclaws seemed interested in these new ideas. That morning, everything changed. Sarah woke to find the pack in a state of high alert. They were clicking rapidly to each other in patterns she had never heard before. Their body language showed fear, which was something Sarah had never seen from these apex predators. Scar approached her and made urgent clicking sounds. He pointed toward the ground, then made digging motions with his claws. "Underground?" Sarah asked. "Something is underground?" Scar nodded, which was a gesture he had learned from watching her. He led her to a nearby clearing where the ground was torn up as if something had burst through from below. In the center of the disturbed earth was a hole. It was perfectly round and disappeared into darkness. The edges looked like they had been melted by acid. Sarah knelt beside the hole and immediately smelled something terrible. It was the smell of decay and chemicals mixed together. Nothing good lived down there. More holes appeared throughout the day. The Ravenclaws found them all over their territory. Each one was the same size, the same perfect circle with melted edges. That night, Sarah was awakened by sounds from underground. Scratching, digging, and something else. Something that sounded like whispering voices. The next morning brought the first attack. Sarah was gathering water from a stream when she heard the clicking alarms of the pack. She ran toward the sound and found chaos. Creatures were pouring out of the holes in the ground. They looked like a nightmare version of insects crossed with snakes. Each one was the size of a large dog, with multiple legs that ended in cutting claws. Their heads were mostly mouth filled with rows of sharp teeth, but the worst part was how they moved. They didn't act like individual animals. They moved together like parts of a single organism, coordinating their attacks with perfect timing. The Ravenclaws fought bravely, but Sarah could see they were in trouble. These underground creatures, which her broken translation device called Nethermaws, fought as a group while the Ravenclaws fought as individuals. Sarah watched the battle and saw the problem immediately. The Ravenclaws were stronger and faster than any individual Nethermaw, but they were being overwhelmed by coordinated attacks. She grabbed Scar's attention and pointed at the battlefield. "Together!" she shouted, making hand gestures to show what she meant. "Fight together!" Scar looked confused, so Sarah tried a different approach. She picked up a stick and drew in the dirt, showing how the Nethermaws moved in groups while the Ravenclaws spread out. Understanding dawned in Scar's yellow eyes. He clicked rapidly to the other Ravenclaws. Slowly, they began to change their fighting style. Instead of each Ravenclaw taking on multiple enemies alone, they started working in pairs. When one attacked, the other protected their back. When one needed to rest, the other covered for them. The change in tactics turned the battle around. The Nethermaw's coordination was no match for Ravenclaw's strength when that strength was properly focused, but Sarah realized this was just the beginning. The Nethermaws retreated into their tunnels, but they would be back. And next time, they would come in greater numbers. Over the following days, Sarah worked with Scar and the pack to prepare for the next attack. She taught them concepts she had learned in military training. How to set up defensive positions. How to use the environment to their advantage. How to coordinate attacks using simple signals. The Ravenclaws were quick learners. Their natural intelligence combined with their hunting instincts made them excellent students of warfare. Sarah also learned more about the Nethermaws by studying the tunnels they left behind. The creatures were eating their way through the planet's underground ecosystem. They consumed everything they found, leaving empty caverns behind them. "They're going to destroy the whole planet if we don't stop them," Sarah told Scar one evening as they sat by the pack's fire. Scar clicked thoughtfully, then drew his own pictures in the dirt. He showed Sarah that the Nethermaws had appeared before many years ago, but never in such large numbers. Something had changed to make them more aggressive. Sarah studied the drawings and felt a chill run down her spine. The timeline Scar showed her matched with increased activity from the Voidborn in this sector of space. The ancient race that had destroyed her ship might be connected to the Nethermaw problem. The second major attack came a week later. This time Sarah was ready. She had helped the Ravenclaws set up defensive positions around the pack's territory. They had prepared weapons from the forest materials and established communication signals using different clicking patterns. When the Nethermaws emerged from their tunnels, They found themselves facing an organized defense instead of confused individual fighters. Sarah rode on Scar's back during the battle, directing the pack's movements like a general commanding troops. She pointed out weak spots in the enemy formation and coordinated flanking attacks. The Ravenclaws adapted her human military tactics to their own abilities. They used their climbing skills to attack from above while others struck from the sides. They worked together to drive the Nethermaws into kill zones where the pack's strongest fighters waited. The battle lasted for hours, but when it ended, not a single Nethermaw had escaped back to the tunnels. As the pack gathered around the battlefield, Sarah realized something important had happened. The Ravenclaws weren't just following her suggestions anymore. They were adding their own ideas and improving on her tactics. Scar approached her and made a complex series of clicks. Sarah's partially repaired translation device managed to catch a few words: pack leader, honor, victory. Sarah looked around at the Ravenclaws, watching her expectantly. These creatures that the galaxy feared as mindless predators had just proven they could learn, adapt, and overcome threats that had challenged them for generations. Far above the planet, the galactic monitoring stations recorded the battle with growing interest. The observers had expected the human to be dead weeks ago. Instead, she was somehow leading a pack of apex predators to victory against threats they had never been able to defeat alone. For the first time, some of the galactic powers began to wonder if they had underestimated both humans and Ravenclaws. On the surface of Kelthera Prime, Sarah Chen stood among her new pack family and realized that she was no longer just trying to survive. She was helping to save an entire species from extinction. And somewhere in the tunnels below, something ancient and hungry stirred in response to its failures. The Nethermaws were just the beginning. Something much worse was coming to the surface. The warning came from the orbital monitoring stations first. Ships were approaching Kelthera Prime. Big ships. Ships that belonged to the Voidborn. Sarah learned about the threat when Scar came running into the pack's camp, clicking urgently in patterns that meant danger from above. The Ravenclaws had their own ways of watching the sky, and they had seen the metal stars that moved wrong. Sarah's partially repaired translation device managed to decode some of the galactic emergency broadcasts. The Voidborn were sending a harvesting fleet to Kelthera Prime. They wanted to collect Ravenclaw specimens for their biological weapons programs. More importantly, they wanted to eliminate what they called the human anomaly that was disrupting their long-term plans for the planet. Sarah realized that her presence had made the entire Ravenclaw species a target. The Voidborn had been content to leave this world alone, as long as its apex predators remained isolated and primitive. But a human teaching them advanced tactics changed everything. She gathered the pack leaders around the fire that night and tried to explain what was coming. Using pictures drawn in the dirt and broken words from her translation device, she showed them that enemies would come from the sky in metal ships. The Ravenclaws understood danger, but they had never fought enemies who attacked from above. Their whole culture was built around ground-based hunting and territorial combat. "We need to unite all the packs," Sarah told Scar. "Every Ravenclaw on the planet needs to work together." Scar made a clicking sound that her device translated as impossible. The different Ravenclaw clans had been fighting each other for territory for thousands of years. They were apex predators who competed with each other as much as they hunted other species. But Sarah had an idea. Over the next few days, she worked with Scar to contact the leaders of neighboring packs. Instead of challenging them to combat, they brought gifts. Weapons made from Nethermaw parts, maps showing safe hunting grounds. Most importantly, they brought proof of their victories against the underground threat. The other pack leaders were suspicious at first. Why would rivals share valuable information? But when Sarah demonstrated the coordinated fighting techniques that had defeated the Nethermaws, their skepticism turned to interest. She showed them how multiple packs could work together without competing for the same territory. How they could share information about threats and opportunities. How they could be stronger together than apart. The concept was revolutionary for a species that had never organized beyond the pack level. The first multi-pack training session was chaos. Ravenclaws from 3 different clans tried to fight as a unit, but their territorial instincts kept getting in the way. There were several minor fights before Sarah figured out how to structure the training. She used their pack hierarchy instincts but expanded them. Instead of one alpha leading one pack, She created a system where pack leaders coordinated with each other while maintaining authority over their own groups. The Ravenclaws adapted to the new structure surprisingly quickly. Their intelligence and natural hunting instincts made them excellent at understanding tactical concepts once they were explained properly. Within 2 weeks, Sarah had united 5 major clans under a single defensive strategy. The Ravenclaws had gone from scattered tribal hunters to a coordinated military force, but it wasn't enough time. The Voidborn harvesting ships arrived early, dropping out of hyperspace in a formation that blocked all escape routes from the planet. Their dark hulls absorbed light like black holes, and their weapons could turn continents to glass. The first landing began at dawn. Sarah watched from a hilltop as the Voidborn dropships descended through the atmosphere. Each ship was the size of a city block, carrying hundreds of Voidborn soldiers and their mechanical servants. The Voidborn themselves were ancient beings that looked like living shadows wrapped in technological armor. They had conquered countless worlds and harvested countless species. To them, the Ravenclaws were just another useful biological resource to be collected. They expected to face scattered tribes of primitive predators who would run or fight individually. Instead, they walked into carefully prepared ambush zones. The first Voidborn landing party never made it out of their dropship. The Ravenclaws had learned to use the planet's environment against invaders. They collapsed the landing zone with carefully placed explosives made from their escape pod's power cells. The second landing party found themselves surrounded by Ravenclaws, who had been trained in coordinated assault tactics. The individual Voidborn soldiers were powerful, but they had never faced enemies who could match their coordination while being physically superior. From her command position, Sarah watched the battle through a scope salvaged from her pod. The Ravenclaws moved like a single organism, flowing around Voidborn positions and striking at weak points with perfect timing. But she knew this was just the beginning. The Voidborn ships in orbit could destroy the planet's surface if they chose to. The ground victories wouldn't matter if the enemy decided to solve their problem with orbital bombardment. "We need to take the fight to them," Sarah told Scar that evening as they planned their next moves. "We need to attack their ships." Scar clicked in patterns that meant impossible again, but Sarah could see him thinking about the problem. She had been studying the wreckage from the destroyed Voidborn dropships. Their technology was incredibly advanced, but it followed logical principles. The ships had life support systems, navigation computers, and weapons that could be understood and potentially used. More importantly, the ships were designed for fighting other technological civilizations. They weren't prepared for enemies who fought with biological advantages and coordinated pack tactics. Sarah proposed something that went against every Ravenclaw instinct. She wanted them to leave their home territory and attack the enemy in an environment they couldn't control. "The ships have corridors like caves," she explained, drawing diagrams in the dirt. "Your climbing abilities will work. Your pack coordination will work. But their long-range weapons won't work in close quarters." The plan was insane by any reasonable military standard. A ground-based species with primitive technology trying to board and capture advanced starships. But the Ravenclaws had learned to trust Sarah's tactical insights. The first shipboarding operation began 3 days later. A captured Voidborn shuttle, piloted by Sarah and crewed by Scar's pack, approached one of the smaller harvesting vessels. The Voidborn detected the shuttle but assumed it was carrying survivors from the ground battles. They allowed it to dock, expecting to interrogate prisoners. Instead, they found themselves facing apex predators in the confined spaces of their own ship. Ravenclaws were designed by evolution to hunt in complex three-dimensional environments. The corridors and chambers of a starship were just another type of hunting ground. Their claws gave them perfect grip on metal surfaces. Their pack coordination let them flow through the ship like water, striking everywhere at once. The Voidborn crew fought back with advanced weapons and superior numbers, but they had never encountered enemies like this. The Ravenclaws absorbed their technological advantages and turned the ship's own systems against them. When the battle ended, the Ravenclaws had captured their first starship. More importantly, they had proven that the supposedly invincible Voidborn could be defeated. News of the victory spread through the underground galactic communication networks. Species that had lived in fear of the Voidborn for thousands of years suddenly had hope. On Kael'thera Prime, Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of a captured Voidborn ship. surrounded by apex predators who had learned to think beyond their hunting instincts. The galaxy was about to learn that humans and Ravenclaws together were more dangerous than either species alone. The Voidborn response was swift and merciless. If they couldn't harvest the Ravenclaws safely, they would sterilize the entire planet from orbit. The massive dreadnought ships moved into bombardment position, their weapons charging with enough power to turn continents into molten glass. Sarah stood on the bridge of their captured ship, watching the enemy fleet prepare to destroy everything she had come to love about this world. The Ravenclaws around her clicked nervously as they saw the energy signatures building on the larger vessels. "They're going to kill the whole planet," Sarah said, more to herself than to anyone else. Scar approached her and made soft clicking sounds. Her translation device caught fragments. Honor, pack, choice, together. Sarah understood. The Ravenclaws were giving her the choice. They could try to escape in their captured ships, leaving their homeworld behind. Or they could make one final stand against impossible odds. But Sarah had learned something important about Ravenclaws over the past months. They didn't run from fights they believed in. And she had learned something about herself, too. She wouldn't abandon the pack that had become her family. "Signal all ships," she told the Ravenclaw operating the communications console. "We attack now." The response that came back through the fleet communications amazed her. The Ravenclaws had captured 6 more Voidborn ships in coordinated boarding actions across the planet. Each ship was crewed by pack warriors who had learned to operate advanced technology through trial and instinct. But even 7 ships against a full Voidborn battle fleet seemed hopeless. The enemy had dozens of vessels, including dreadnoughts that could destroy planets. Sarah looked at the tactical display and remembered her military training. Sometimes the only way to win an impossible battle was to change the rules of engagement. "Scar, can your people coordinate attacks across multiple ships simultaneously?" Scar clicked affirmatively. The pack bonds that connected Ravenclaws could work across distance and even through space. They had tested this during their shipboarding operations. "Then we don't fight like a fleet," Sarah said, her mind racing through possibilities. "We fight like a pack." The Voidborn expected their enemies to engage in standard space combat. Ship against ship, exchanging fire at long range until one side was destroyed. Their formations and tactics were built around this type of warfare. They weren't prepared for enemies who treated their entire fleet as a single hunting pack. The attack began with the smallest Ravenclaw ships, accelerating toward the enemy at maximum speed. The Voidborn responded exactly as Sarah predicted, focusing their massive firepower on the apparent suicide runs. But the small ships weren't trying to destroy enemy vessels. They were hurting them. Like pack hunters driving prey toward waiting predators, the Ravenclaw ships forced the Voidborn fleet into a tighter formation. The enemy commanders fell back on their training, clustering their ships for mutual defense. That was exactly what Sarah wanted them to do. "Now," she whispered. The larger captured ships, led by Sarah and Scar, emerged from the planet's shadow at full acceleration. But instead of attacking the heavily armed Voidborn warships, they targeted something much more vulnerable. The Voidborn command ship sat in the center of their formation, protected by layers of smaller vessels. It was heavily armored but not designed for direct combat. Its role was coordination and control. Sarah's ship, with Ravenclaws clinging to its hull like living armor, smashed through the defensive perimeter. The pack warriors poured through breached sections of the command ship's hull, their claws finding purchase on metal walls as they flowed through corridors like a living tide. The Voidborn crew fought desperately, but they were facing apex predators in an environment that favored speed and ferocity over advanced technology. The ship's own defenses became useless as Ravenclaws moved through air vents and maintenance shafts that no humanoid could navigate. Within minutes, Scar's pack had reached the command center. The Voidborn admiral, ancient and terrible in his technological armor, faced down a 9-foot reptilian predator who had learned to think strategically. The battle was brief. With their command ship captured and their coordination broken, the Voidborn fleet began to fall apart. Individual ships tried to retreat, but they found themselves hunted by packs of smaller vessels that coordinated their attacks with predatory precision. Sarah watched from the captured command center as the most feared fleet in the galaxy was systematically destroyed by creatures that had been using stone tools just months ago, but the real victory wasn't in the space battle. It was in what came after. News of the Voidborn defeat spread through the galaxy faster than light. Species that had been enslaved or terrorized by the ancient race for millennia suddenly realized their oppressors could be beaten. Rebellions erupted on 100 worlds. Trade routes that had been controlled by Voidborn fear were suddenly open. The galactic balance of power shifted overnight, and at the center of it all was a human who had fallen from the sky and taught apex predators to think beyond their individual hunting instincts. 3 months later, Sarah stood in what had once been a Voidborn command center and was now the first human Ravenclaw embassy. The station orbited Calthera Prime, serving as a meeting place for species that wanted to understand how the impossible had happened. Scar approached her, now bearing new scars from their battles but moving with the confidence of a pack leader who had conquered the stars. He carried a translation device that actually worked, built from combined human and Voidborn technology. "The Kitharan delegation is here," he said in accented but clear standard Galactic. "They want to know if we will teach their military our coordination techniques." Sarah smiled and looked out at the ships waiting in orbit. The proud Kitharan Empire, the calculating Zephyrite Collective, the warrior clans of Drakmor, all of them were here because they had watched something impossible happen. A single human had fallen onto a quarantine world and emerged leading a species that could defeat the galaxy's oldest nightmare. "Tell them we'll consider it," Sarah said. "But first they need to understand something important." "What is that, pack leader?" Scar asked, using the title the Ravenclaws had given her. "We're not teachers. We're partners." The Ravenclaws didn't learn to be human. They learned to be better than they were before. And so did I. Outside the embassy, more ships arrived every day. Diplomats, merchants, scientists, and warriors all wanting to understand the new alliance that had changed everything. Some came seeking military advantages. Others wanted trade agreements. A few were genuinely interested in the idea that cooperation between different species could achieve things that neither could manage alone. Sarah's personal quarters were filled with gifts from grateful civilizations. Artwork, technology, and formal declarations of friendship from species that had been freed from Voidborn domination. But her favorite gift was much simpler. It was a small carving that one of the young Ravenclaws had made, showing a human and a Ravenclaw standing together against the stars. The galaxy had watched her fall from grace. They had expected her to die alone on a world full of monsters. Instead, she had learned that monsters were just people who had never been given the chance to be anything else. And now, as she looked out at the ships of 100 different species gathered peacefully around Calthera Prime, Sarah Chen knew that her fall had been the best thing that could have happened to all of them. The apex predators had learned to dream beyond their hunting grounds, and the galaxy would never be the same.